All right. Okay, so hello everyone, welcome. I'm just going to start letting everyone in and watch our attendees grow. Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm going to get started. As people trickle in, we'll repost some information in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen really quickly and give you guys a little introduction. Thank you for joining us today. So we're going to keep this session really comfortable and casual. Right now in the chat box, I'm going to place a link where you can locate the tests that we're going to be reviewing today in a very short PowerPoint that just sort of echoes the information that we're going to go over. But before we begin, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Lacey Hall. I am the Clinical Director of Learning and Development here at Microbiome Labs. I have the very awesome opportunity to talk with practitioners such as yourself day in and day out about clinical correlations and findings in BiomeFx, in clinical settings, and in other scenarios. And so today we're going to take a look at a real life patient on the most up-to-date version of our stool test, BiomeFx. We'll walk through the patient presentation, some of the very important clinical findings and the pattern that we had identified, and then go over the treatment protocol that we determined after the fact. So for some of you, you may be really familiar with BiomeFx. Some of you may be new to it. So let's keep this session really interactive and open. If you've got questions, I'll keep the chat box open the whole time. So as we're going over different parts of the report, feel free to drop me a line, ask a question, and I'm happy to answer it to the best of my ability. And then if you've got questions after the fact, you can certainly reach me through your rep or directly. All right, so to start off, let's look at who we're dealing with today. This patient is a 39-year-old female. She had been suffering for quite a long time from epigastric pain and discomfort, especially following meals. She was very bloated with a lot of gas, just distension overall, and just feeling very unwell. She noticed a higher complaint and pain when consuming high-fat, oily foods. They did do different ultrasounds. We did look at her gallbladder. There weren't any issues. There was no inflammation. Ran other laboratory metrics, also looking at her just gallbladder function and bile as well, but all was normal. And then this on top of the pain, she was experiencing pretty frequent bowel movements, 2 to 5 bowel movements a day. So definitely increased intestinal motility. And with that, she would notice a greasy stool as well. So there was definitely the foods that she was consuming that were causing her pain. She was seeing that evidenced in the toilet. And so sorry if you are eating your lunch. Microbiome is never, it can make some people a little nauseous, I'm sure, but it's the nature of the beast. She did suffer from brain fog and was following a gluten-free diet, but she noted lots of different food sensitivities and foods that she was afraid to eat. There were also noted different abnormal liver function tests, and that was really the bulk of the information that we were presented with. Now, I picked this patient presentation because this is someone that you may see pretty frequently. This isn't like some very obscure type of patient that would walk into your clinic on a day-to-day basis. This is a general person that's trying to be healthy. They're actually putting their best foot forward the best they can, and they're really not getting anywhere. And despite changing the diet, changing lifestyle, it was really just running into a brick wall of not knowing where to go. And so the test itself was able to provide a lot of insight into next steps to take and an action plan. So now I'm going to walk through the report, and then we'll go over some of the findings afterwards. So tell me, feel free to let me know if like the text is too small, if I need to zoom in or zoom out. I'm happy to adjust. All right, so the BiomeFx report is 20 pages long. It actually may be longer at this point, 21. So we will walk through each page, but I will hone in and focus on different areas more than others that are relevant to this report. If you do want more information about certain sections that I'm not digging deep into, we do have additional resources. You can feel free to go to the website at biomefx.com. There is an interpretation guide, report recommendations, and different videos that can help carry you along the way. And then later on, we can put some information in the chat box about where to schedule clinical consultations. If you have run the report and run the test on patients, you have the opportunity to chat with our clinical experts. And we have a team of 9 doctors and clinicians that are interpreting the report these days. All right, so this first page is the report summary. I don't actually spend a lot of time here because I like to dig through the entirety of the report, but I know some people prefer to get most of the information off of this page. The first real page of the report, we're looking at different indices. So this first marker here is really just an overall measure. How strong is the microbiome? This is your overall score and kind of your grade. This person has a 26 out of 40. You know, if we were measuring this from a grading standpoint, they're not doing that well. And there's a lot of opportunity to get this number further, just higher, above 30. 30 and above would be considered pretty ideal. Now we get this index, this overall index, by adding up 4 individual indices, which would include the alpha diversity, beta diversity, resistome, and then our pathogen occurrence. And I'll go over each of those right now. So the alpha diversity index is simply the number of bacterial species in the gut. And we know that we want the more, the merrier. So the more bacteria living in your gut, the healthier the environment typically becomes. It creates a lot more competition and becomes the foundation to the gut itself. This is a very important index, if not the most important index. It's really hard to have a healthy gut if you just don't have a lot of bacterial species around, because most likely the ones that are hanging around are probably a little problematic. They're probably the ones that are more antibiotic and antibacterial resistant. They're more hardy and they can survive. And most likely your healthier commensal and keystone species are the ones that have been wiped out. So if we look at her report here, she's at a score of 4.56 out of 10 with 145 species detected in the sample. Now, if we look at the chart here, most people would sort of land in this boxed area. And then the whiskers, the little T's on the top and the bottom, would be more of your outliers. But again, we want to bring as many bacteria to the party as possible. So one of our goals that we're going to work on later is boosting this, because the more bacteria, the more competition, the more strong the foundation is of the gut. It's very simple and basic, but it can't be said enough. Reasons why this can be low in a patient would be exposure to antibiotics, and that would even include things like glyphosate, not eating organics, because it's going to have a similar effect and impact on the microbiome by disrupting the microbiota and the way that bacteria can reside. And then ways to enhance this will go hand in hand with some of the other recommendations that we'll talk about later. Now, when we talk about the beta diversity index, this is a measurement of sort of the quality of bacteria. Our goal is to have a composition of bacteria in the gut that are similar to a healthy individual. And so with this test, the reference ranges and the individuals used to create the reference ranges are quote unquote healthy individuals. They were participants in the Human Microbiome Project and the American Gut Project. So utilizing people that are of normal weight, that don't have chronic disease, that really helps up our ante and the quality of the people that we're utilizing for our reference ranges. And we can't say the same thing for other laboratories. In fact, you can create reference ranges from anyone off the street. Usually you only need around 60 people. and that's it. You want to buy a CBC machine and you want to create your own reference ranges. Doesn't take a lot. So we're using over 400 people to create these reference ranges, and the database alone has hundreds of thousands of samples. So that helps bring a lot of strength to the information at our fingertips, and accuracy is key when using any of these tests. So again, the beta diversity is looking at the quality of the bacteria within the gut. So we're looking at this green dot, and what we want is the green dot to be in the dark cluster. That's going to indicate a similarity. Now, 8.2 is not bad. It's pulling away just slightly. So there's a lot of detail management that we're going to talk through. And there are some problems in this report, but it's not so bad that we're looking at true, inflammatory bowel diseases or anything that's too severe. Now, let me move the chat box. When we look at the resistome, this is looking at how resilient, how robust the gut is when it is encountering things like antibiotics and different things from our environment, our diet, that can disrupt the microbiota. So a lot of the information is taking into account antibiotic and antimicroresistant genes, since there are certain bacteria that are able to evolve and change in order to become more resistant. That would include groups like Streptococcus and Staphylococcus groups, which we'll see are present at pretty high amounts in this specimen. So this is going to, we want to create more competition again, and that'll create a stronger resistome as well. Okay, so now we're starting to look again at a pretty high level. That first page is just an index. We're really getting this like really high overview of what is going on in the gut, kind of the general personality, but it's not giving us the detail. So as we move through the report, we start to hone in more and more. So we start off really broad, and then we start to get more specific to help come up with that plan. So that's just giving us a little bit of a teaser as to what's going to happen next. Now, with this phylum page, if you think back to high school biology, the phylum is kind of the larger group, right? So we're mainly looking at bacteria, but we are looking at other organisms as well. On the left, this is our kind of ideal patient here. This donut chart represents what a standard healthy gut should be comprised of. And it's really only 4 major phyla and then everything else sprinkled in. So these are kind of the houses where all of the species and keystones reside. And most guts, generally speaking in the literature, want to have a little more than 50% Bacteroidetes, about 43% Firmicutes, 1.5% Actinobacteria, 1.5% Proteobacteria, and then everything else. And each of these groups have different characteristics that go along with the groups of bacteria that live in them. And as you get more comfortable with the report, you pick up so much information about bacteria. I'm a dietitian, and I can't even tell you how much stuff I know about bacteria now because of learning and being curious about the report. It's really fun to go down the rabbit holes, and I promise you the rabbit holes never stop when it comes to the human microbiome. So we can see in this picture here for this patient, they're actually not doing too bad with their Bacteroidetes to Firmicutes in the way it's balanced. She has a little bit more Actinobacteria, a lower level of Proteobacteria, which is your more inflammatory group. So she's not doing too bad. We call these 5 phyla of bacteria this core microbiome. Most everyone that you encounter is going to have these groups represented. So this group here, not showing up for her, this is Verrucomicrobia. This is one of our favorite bacteria reside. It's called Akkermansia muciniphila. We're seeing that it's not showing up, so we're not going to see it most likely on the other pages as well. When we look down here on the report, now we separated these out for a reason. The ones on top, again, being sort of the core to the microbiome, these are a little more problematic. These are our problem children, I like to say. And not all of them are bacteria. So I'll walk through a couple of them. I'm not going to walk through all of them for the sake of time, but some that are of interest. This Euarchaeota, these are where your methanogens live. So if you're worried about constipation, bloating, and issues with that with your patient, check there first. It's going to be your first hint and clue. Second would be this Synergistides. This is a bacteria that's often linked to gingivitis, oral dysbiosis, and if it's high, I often think about the gastric barrier and stomach acid. Why is it getting through? Why is it overgrown in your colon? Because that's 20 feet from your mouth. So you can start to ask questions as to what's going on in different parts of the gastrointestinal tract. Ascomycota is where yeasts, funguses, and even molds live. So for some of us, we're so determined to find out if our patients have candida. But there's so many other species and groups of microorganisms within this phyla that could be giving similar symptoms as candida, but it's something else. So it can give you still a sign that yeast and funguses are overgrown. And then down here we see fusobacteria, which is quite inflammatory. It's linked to inflammatory bowel diseases, even colorectal cancers. Really shouldn't be there. We don't want to see it popping up in any significant amount. It's also linked to things like hydrogen sulfide production, ammonia production, things that are detrimental to the whole of our intestinal lumen and the ecology of the gut. So if we scroll down to this part of the graphs, if we add up these here, this is pretty much 100% of the groups that are within the gut, all right? Joel asks if I have a cheat sheet for the phylum. So we are working on that. We've been working on it for a while and we understand the importance. We're actually working with a team to help bring this to life because it's quite an undertaking. We do have some internal resources, but one thing we do have that's pretty much finished is a taxonomy tree to show where different groups live, because I think that's one of the key pieces to deciphering this test versus other tests on the market. It really challenges you as a provider to understand bacteria and their functions more. So we're working on that for sure. We definitely get that. Okay. So I won't spend a lot of time on this page today because there's a lot to cover, but we want to really just see, again, what is the general tone? Who are the biggest groups of bacteria being represented in the gut? So we can see that most of the family level of bacteria showing up are Bacteroides, and then some from the Firmicutes, phyla, Actinobacteria, and Bifidobacteria, so on and so forth. For myself, the main thing I get out of this page and what I'm looking for are most of the time the inflammatory species and understanding proteobacteria groups that could be really popping up in high amounts, or different other ones like, let's see, healthier groups too. Again, we're not going to see any Akkermansia on the last page because we kind of understand now it wasn't there to begin with. And so figuring out what to do, what are some strategies to get it growing is kind of what I focus on at that point as well. All right, so this page is what we like to call the fingerprint page. So those last two pages pretty much show up in everyone. And this page is more unique to you. Since your microbiome is, again, it's individualized. You are the only person walking this planet with this microbiome. Not even identical twins have the same microbiome. So on this page, the bacteria that pop up will be different from patient to patient. Sometimes there are no bacteria popping up here, and that usually means they've been on a ton of antibiotics and there aren't a lot of bacteria in the gut to begin with. The two notable ones on here that I think we'll come back to over and over when looking at the pattern of this report are the Peptostreptococcus ACA and then the Streptococcus ACA. Both of these being more antibiotic resistant, more linked to things like SIBO, more linked to things like abscesses in different parts of the body. It becomes clinically relevant when we get to looking at hydrogen sulfide reduction in the gut and the way in which some of these bacteria play a role there, and with lactate production and with ammonia production as well. So we'll see the clinical significance of these bacteria become relevant as we walk on. With these dysbiosis ratios, there wasn't anything too notable here, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. But essentially all we're doing is looking at how well different groups of bacteria are sort of being controlled. The important thing when it comes to the human microbiome is balance, because there's not a recipe, unfortunately. There's no perfect microbiome, but we want to make sure different groups are not overgrowing. I mean, that's a really important foundational tenet to the microbiome. So in this first one, we want to make sure Firmicutes is staying in check. We usually want just a little bit more Bacteroides than Firmicutes. That's ideal. 50-50, if our ratio is at around 1, like this specimen, it's not bad. It's totally fine. But once that ratio gets really out of balance, and say you've got 90% firmicutes and 10% bacteroidetes, you've got problems, typically linking back to inflammation, obesity, and I see it very often clinically in autoimmune conditions, especially Hashimoto's. So that's where these ratios become really important when it gets more extreme. The second one links back to inflammation. It's really asking ourselves, is this inflammatory group, proteobacteria, is it being well controlled? That's what this ratio is asking us. And actinobacteria does a great job of making sure this group is suppressed. So oftentimes, if this ratio is really elevated, we're talking about inflammation. Lipopolysaccharide is within the walls of this proteobacteria. And when it gets overgrown, and if there's intestinal permeability, which, let's be honest, that's most patients, then we are discussing a lot more than just inflammation in the gut. It's inflammation in the body and in the brain, and it's going to impact every bodily system. And then this last ratio is, these are species with bacterophylla. So we want to look at Prevotella to Bacteroides, the PB ratio. And our overall goal is to have just a nice balance here. Now, a lot of people don't have adequate amounts of Prevotella. And as a clinician, for you and I, it's difficult to say, was it the chicken or the egg? Were they born with Prevotella? Or did they wipe it out during the course of their life after taking antibiotics by eating a traditional standard Western diet? Sometimes it's hard to determine where the starting point is. So getting a thorough patient history, especially when it comes to dietary recall, is actually very important. Even antibiotic use as a child can influence some of these ratios here. All right. Moving on to our pathobiome. This is the fourth index that's influencing the first index that we looked at, called the overall gut microbiome index. And we're looking at 34 pathogens, I believe. We just increased it, so I don't remember off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure it's 34. It might be 35. And we're looking at a variety. Here, let me scan, and then I'll go back up. So we're looking at our top pathogenic species of bacteria, protists, fungi, and viruses. All right, so this is in the report to take a gander at. And there are some that we see really often. We definitely see C. diff, E. coli. We see that on a lot of people. And this is where we need to take the blinders off, where we need to not see the forest for the trees, because there's so much more to the human microbiome than pathogens. We need to take into consideration the alpha diversity. How many bacteria are in the gut? We need to take into consideration inflammatory byproducts that we'll look at in a few pages. And then we need to make a clinical decision on how aggressive do we need to be? Or if we support the overall gut ecology and the whole of the microbiome, can it self-resolve? Because you are a self-healing organism. And I believe, and I hope you do too, if you give the body and the gut the proper tools, it can get itself back to its baseline and helping make it healthy again. So in this situation, we see these three pathogens pop up. I didn't mention the Bacteroides fragilis, but here we have, I gotta move the chat again, but we need to take a look at the sample relative abundance. And we see here that the C. diff is just slightly out of range. A lot of people carry C. diff in their gut. A lot of people are asymptomatic carriers. It's a spore and it can survive in the environment, it can survive on hard surfaces. If any of you have worked in a hospital, I can almost guarantee you've got C. diff in your gut. It's just very prevalent and difficult to get rid of. Now, we don't really need to care about it too much until it reaches a higher amount. Now, generally speaking, you're in the hospital when this amount is around 6%. That's kind of our, generally speaking. That would indicate a pretty severe infection, definitely experiencing symptoms like frequent bowel movements, maybe even blood in the stool, definitely the smell of C. diff in the stool. If you've ever smelt it, you can never forget it, unfortunately. So with this, we're at 0.6%. Still pretty low, but let's keep it that way. Because it's so low, because it's most likely not the cause of the frequent bowel movements in this situation. We're going to do something about it, but we're not going to make it the focus of our clinical intervention. Now, C. diff can secrete different toxins, these virulence factors. We do look for those as well, because that also gives us clinical clues as to know how serious do we need to take this. Now, for this situation, no virulence factors were detected. Great, we're on the right track. We can use things like serum-derived immunoglobulins to bind C. diff toxins. And so that's something to always kind of keep in your clinical back pocket. It's super effective, very soothing to the intestinal tract, and then it prevents your immune system from having to deal with these toxins, which at the end of the day is just preventing inflammation, and that's the name of the game. You know, we really can't talk about the human microbiome without weaving in the immune system story, and that, you know, links directly to the inflammatory story as well. So with E. coli, again, at a pretty low amount, E. coli is not all bad. It creates a lot of vitamins for us, creates lactate, has some beneficial functions as well. And then Bacteroides fragilis can be quite inflammatory, linking to things like different intestinal abscesses, breaking down that mucosal barrier, which is really imperative to gut function as well. So we want to take care of them, but we're going to look to take care of them a little more globally. All right, so now we're at our page with the keystone species of bacteria. Keystone species just take up a tiny sliver of your overall gut microbiome, but they play such a big role in dictating the health. So we saw alpha diversity low, right? We know that there aren't a lot of bacterial species living in the gut. And we also know that our keystone species are pretty wiped out. We really don't have a good representation of them here. So it's hard to have a good foundation to the gut with both absent. We see a lot of our short chain fatty acid producers are not detected at all. If they are, they're in a reasonably low amount still. And so it's just not enough. And so getting this page more healthy and getting alpha diversity to become more robust and healthy as well is really going to be two pillars to long-term solutions for this person's microbiome. If we gave antibiotics, if we gave antimicrobials, this page isn't going to get any better. Neither is that alpha diversity piece. And there's a good chance the streptococcus, peptostreptococcus, and C. diff are going to survive. So we want to be, again, a little more tailored and don't pull that trigger on antimicrobials so quickly, because that can actually cause a lot more problems in the end. We use them, but we just use them very carefully. Not much different than antibiotics at the end of the day. Okay, so for our short chain fatty acid producers, this is where our test begins to differ. So we look at our producers, we look at how many have been detected and what percentile they're in. And then we look at the genes and the functionality to see, are they working? Are they doing what they're supposed to do? So how are the bacteria actually functioning within our gut becomes really important. So I'm going to move this over a little bit. So now let's assess, what is your body doing with the substrate that it's got? So what do your bacteria like to eat? They love fiber. They like fiber more than protein, and they like protein more than fat. And with fiber and non-digestible carbohydrates, they're able to create the most short chain fatty acids, a little bit of lactate, which helps intestinal pH, and then other gases, which is just totally normal. Now, when it comes to the consumption of protein, it's not bad. We obviously need protein. We just don't need our diet to be 90% protein, which is the case for a lot of people I get to talk with. Because while you can create some short chain fatty acids from protein, you also have the potential to create a lot of inflammatory byproducts. And we're going to look at these here today. So when it comes to sacrolytic fermentation, this is the same as just saying, how well are you fermenting carbohydrates to create short chain fatty acids? That's the only question it's asking. We don't have a lot of bacteria present that are creating short chain fatty acids. So we'd probably make the clinical educated guess to say, probably not doing so hot. And in fact, that's the case. With overall sacrolytic fermentation, we're only at the 6th percentile. Ooh, we're low, right? Very low. Butyrate production, almost non-existent, teeny tiny amounts. Propionate, very low. Acetate, doing okay. Now, typically speaking, acetate can feed your butyrate producers in order to create butyrate. We don't have a lot of that happening here, and that can be obviously a problem. Short chain fatty acids are an energy source for your enterocytes. They're signaling molecules that interact with the endocrine cells that are lining the intestinal barrier. They help provide a link between that gut-brain connection, liver health, insulin sensitivity. I mean, you can go on and on about the functions of short chain fatty acids. Also plays a role in colonic motility and the immune system functioning. There's tons. One of my favorite things to talk about, but I'll pause and halt there so I don't lose you all on this presentation. Now, acetate, this person's she's at a good level here, but excessive acetate, which I wouldn't say is this case, but for your own clinical information and knowledge, excessive acetate can lead to fatty liver. So just knowing if you do see this off the chart high, it can lead to problems, but good amounts of it actually help to improve the gut skin access. And we see lower levels of acne, especially non-cystic acne in individuals. Just a little pearl there to learn about. All right, so without those short chain fatty acids, one of their primary responsibilities is to keep the intestinal lumen a little more acidic. We want the intestinal whorl to stay slightly acidic. It's important. That's what your commensal species like. That's what your keystone species like. Now for lactate, also being pretty acidic, it's pretty robust, right? There's the question of whether the body is overcompensating or trying to compensate for the fact that short chain fatty acids are not present in an adequate amount. Now, with this, where is it coming from? It can be coming from the streptococcus. It can be coming from the E. coli. Other bacteria besides lactobacillus species secrete lactate. So it's pretty high. Now, one problem that can happen if it's too high, it can be pretty toxic to the intestinal barrier. So, thinking about barrier integrity is going to become pretty important here in a second. Cardiolytic fermentation is really just the inflammatory byproducts that can come from protein fermentation. We don't want it to be high. That can cause a lot of inflammation in the gut. Overall, this level is pretty low. We don't see high levels of it. And we don't see high polyamine production either, which are generally speaking, again, pretty inflammatory if they're overgrown, especially one of them. There's 3 within this group, but cadaverine, which is the most lovely name, is the most inflammatory. We don't see high phenols. Phenolic compounds like P-cresol are very toxic to the intestinal lining. Sometimes they link back to things like atopic dermatitis and skin issues. She doesn't have that issue. But now we get to kind of the core of what we're dealing with. So we have 3 markers coming up that really paint the picture of our pattern. So we've got, let's back up for a minute here though. We have low alpha diversity, that's important. We have low keystone species. We have pretty much non-existent short chain fatty acids, right? So foundationally, it's flat. We don't have a lot to work off of. Her foundation is compromised. On top of that, we have a lot of ammonia production. She's pretty high. And ammonia that's created by bacteria and different microbes in the gut doesn't just stay in the intestinal lumen. It can seep out into the bloodstream. And this can put pressure on your liver, on your kidneys, and even on your brain to detoxify this byproduct through the liver and kidneys to be excreted. So we want to take care of that. We're going to talk about liver health because supporting these detoxification pathways is going to become really imperative. So talking about, is she a casual drinker? Maybe we need to stop that for a while. And then are we using supplemental glutamine in this patient? Glutamine can actually play into this process, can actually feed the bacteria that are secreting ammonia. And so we don't want to use supplemental glutamine in this situation. I'm not opposed to glutamine in all states, but in this case, no, it is not appropriate. It's not going to, there are other things that we can choose that can help heal the intestinal barrier way more than glutamine in this situation. On top of that, it can be very neuroexcitatory. So I don't always go toward glutamine. And then with hydrogen sulfide, we see that she's very high. She's pretty off the chart high. Hydrogen sulfide is pretty toxic to the intestinal lining. It can lead to things like diarrhea. So this is where I believe the core of her problem resides. I think that she is creating way too much hydrogen sulfide. It's very inflammatory to the gut. It's leading to things like diarrhea. It's very acidic in the gut, too acidic. And this is where she needs to follow up and do a SIBO test, rule that out, because she did have the epigastric pain, discomfort, and distension with a lot of the foods that she's been consuming. And we're seeing it further down in her gastrointestinal tract too. This is not a SIBO test, but it can give you that clinical insight and clues as to where to go next. Because as functional medicine providers, we are investigators, and we're always, taking off each layer of the onion to really get to the core. Now, there are a lot of things that we can do for high hydrogen sulfide production in the gut, and I'll go over those when we talk about our protocol. No methane production. I didn't think there would be. We didn't see the methane producers at the phylum level elevated at all. Her GABA production is pretty non-existent from the gut standpoint. Glutathione helps stimulate GABA production in the gut and regulates the release. And a lot of GABA can be produced from the bifidobacteria group, and that really wasn't showing up at all in her keystone species. So GABA production being compromised, this can play a role in being able to relax and having a better, even adaptive stress response. So supporting the gut-brain axis can be really important. And checking with our patients on their circadian rhythms and their quality of sleep is really important here too. But that wasn't the primary focus of her report, so we won't spend too much time there. And then this is the third part of her pattern that was really important, her high histamine production. So histamine production in the gut from certain groups of bacteria is really important because it can influence the way your body is responding to environmental triggers, the way in which your mast cells are playing a role with IgE production, even in terms of overall allergic responses. So histamine production in the gut stems from different bacteria. Now we can use products like Histao or different enzymes to help with degrading the histamines that are being produced in our gut. However, that's a Band-Aid. Our real goal is to change the type of bacteria living there. That's going to be the overall goal. Because if you remember back in her patient presentation slide, she has a lot of food intolerances. And sometimes it's just because of the bacteria residing there and the histamines that they're producing in response to the foods that are coming down the intestinal tract. So by healing this, guess what you get to do? You get to put a feather in your cap, because if she's less intolerant to the foods around her, if you're giving her more freedom in her life, she gets to go back to being well. And so we see this happen a lot after people complete reconditioning protocols where they're changing the bacteria in the gut, they're changing how they function. And that's going to change how you feel on a day-to-day basis. And that's pretty exciting. Okay, indoles. Indoles are really healthy. They are actually from the bacterial breakdown of tryptophan. And tryptophan plays a role in so many different pathways, including different neurotransmitters that are being produced in the gut directly, and including serotonin. Indoles have the great job of helping with barrier integrity, preventing intestinal permeability. They can even help break down xenobiotics, so estrogens that are found in plastics. So really good. Hers are low, obviously. So we can even encourage more tryptophan consumption. So let's see here. Jessica asks, what benefit would SIBO test have, though, since this test gives us the identity and amount and diversity of bacteria? Isn't the solution going to be to bring balance and recondition rather than treat for SIBO? Yes and no. That's a great question. I leave it in the hands of the provider, because one of the ways in which we can overcome hydrogen sulfide overgrowth is with the use of oligosaccharides like the galacto-oligosaccharide has some clinical efficacy and definitely some therapeutic benefits, resistant starches, and getting those keystones to grow. However, if the problem, and part of the problem is in the small bowel, that's not appropriate at the start of our protocol. So that's where, really working with the patient and understanding. I am not a fan of testing just to test, because at the end of the day, it's going to be a small fortune, right? So we are looking at different parts of the intestinal tract, and so just trying to put the puzzle pieces together. But that is correct in your thinking and where you're at there. And then the last piece to her clinical puzzle that was pretty significant is the way in which she's recycling estrogen. So when we look at the estrobolome, we can see different bacteria. This is a group of bacteria, so not just one or two types of bacteria that can influence the recycling of estrogen in the body. Now, we want to make sure we're excreting estrogen properly. Now, if there's an overgrowth of bacteria that are secreting this enzyme, beta-glucuronidase, then we will see that recycling happen more and more. Now, for her, right, we already know the liver is a little bit taxed. She's got that elevated ammonia, and there's a lot more going on. So supporting the liver and the deconjugation of bacteria so that it can be removed from the body becomes really important. So this is another place where potentially more testing is warranted. Is that elevated estrogen on this elevated estrogen potential that's noted on this test linking back to other laboratory results, like a Dutch test or ZRT or whatever you like to use? It doesn't matter to me, as long as we're getting the pieces of the puzzle. And some people, they may present with PCOS or cystic acne, things like that, that play a role in an estrogen dominance. Now, and there's obviously other symptoms. So we can support the body, and it does come back to kind of changing who is living there. We want to lower the groups of bacteria that are our primary beta-glucuronidase secretors, and those are usually more of our problematic bacteria. And we have lists of those bacteria, again, in the interpretation guide that can be helpful in just kind of getting your bearings with the who and the what are they doing. And the last part of this, and then we'll move on to the protocol, is vitamin biosynthesis. So I get a lot of questions here. I think there's a lot of confusion. We're only looking in the world of your gut, right? In this tiny intestinal lumen, what is this world doing? And these bacteria can create their own vitamins, and they need them for the same reasons you and I need them, especially B vitamins. They need them in their ATP synthesis. They need them for energy. And while bacteria A may create thiamine, maybe bacteria B doesn't. And so it requires thiamine that's being produced from that other bacteria in order to continue on its metabolic processes. So it's an intricate cross-feeding of bacteria. Oftentimes this links back to the alpha diversity, but certain bacteria are better than others at secreting vitamins. Again, E. coli gets a bad rap for a lot of reasons, but it's has a good role here. Now, this umbrella of vitamin biosynthesis includes more than what we're looking at the report, but we list out some of the more prevalent ones. Now, you as a human have the benefit of absorbing a lot of these bacteria, through the intestinal lumen. Not always, but some of them are more absorbable than others. But this isn't to replace a micronutrient test. I do think a micronutrient test is pretty pivotal to overall, kind of bridging that gap. And so we see here that the gut has adequate thiamine, riboflavins a little bit low, pantothenic acid being right smack dab in the middle. B6 is pretty good, biotin is pretty good, this one's not so bad. Then we come to folate and cobalamin. So both of these, you actually have the benefit of absorbing potentially 37% of your daily needs through the gut lining. And then for B12, 31%. So being on the lower end, if she's not taking anything that would contain these nutrients, she could be at risk for deficiency. Now, if you take a folate or B12 supplement, it's never going to reach your gut. It's going to be absorbed way before it ever reaches the depths of your colon. But we're covering our bases and improving internal nutrient stores. So for most everybody, I do focus in on here And if there is consistent low levels, then I do recommend additional supplementation. And then same here, vitamin K2. We don't get K2 in our diet unless you're eating a ton of natto. And I don't know about you, it's disgusting. I try to be open-minded to different foods, but I can't stand it. So vitamin K2 is very important for our bone density. This is a 39-year-old woman. I'm 37. I want to keep my bones healthy until the day I die. So vitamin K2 does a great job of taking calcium out of your blood serum and helping to deposit it where it needs to be. That includes taking it out of your arteries so there aren't calcium deposits. It's going to improve arterial elasticity by playing a role in elastin production as well. So with that, I mean, that's something that I'd want her to take additionally. And at the end of the day, we'll have to evaluate how many different pills we're putting somebody on. If it gets to the point where it's like, oh, it's too much, then, take K2 on the weekend. We can be flexible with our protocols and work with our patients in ways that work with their lifestyle. Because you and I may write out the most beautiful blueprint for what we want, but at the end of the day, it has to work in reality. Okay, so I know that was a lot of information, but I promise you, after a few of these, you just look at them and you're done in 3 minutes. Okay, so what do we find here, right? Our primary findings on this report: low number of bacteria living there. So tiny, or not so small, but there's a lot of opportunity, right? Let's lift this bar, we can do that. When we improve alpha diversity, and if we can simultaneously get keystone species growing, the effect, hopefully the downstream effect, is going to be more short chain fatty acid production. That's pivotal. This is where we can, really reset that foundation of the gut. Higher levels of bacteria that are associated with SIBO. So again, questioning whether do we need to do SIBO testing. It's going to be where the clinical decision making is in your hands. But with the the Streptococcus and the Peptostreptococcus, additionally with the elevated hydrogen sulfide, there's a potential to see a SIBO. And oftentimes with hydrogen sulfide, we see a flat line in SIBO. And there's all sorts of different brands out there. A lot of practitioners like Aerodiagnostics. Now, we do see pathogens. They're not the primary concern, but the protocol that we create is going to have a few layers to it where hopefully we're able to just knock out those pathogens naturally without having to bring in oil of oregano or biocidin or anything like that. That could, be beneficial in some clinical scenarios, but in what we're dealing with right now might make this situation worse, which we don't want. We need to protect the liver. Elevated ammonia can be quite detrimental. I think it links back to her brain fog, and it's certainly putting a lot of stress on her liver and kidneys. Elevated hydrogen sulfide, and then the elevated histamine. All right, so what do we want to do about it? So first, I'm going to focus on some of the products from our company, and then we'll branch out into other products that can be used as support as well. So she's obviously using the bathroom too frequently, 2 to 5 times a day, every day for a very long time is just too much. We want to help to start binding these bacterial toxins. So we can use immunoglobulins that are derived from a bovine source, and they don't enter your bloodstream. These immunoglobulins don't hang out with your immunoglobulins in your body. They stay in your intestinal lumen. They stay there, and they're basically binders. They absorb bacterial toxins, so you don't have to. So usually people, especially our patients that have Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, they love this product. And I would put her on a higher dose. So on the bottle, it's 4 caps a day. I would double it, giving her 4 grams basically of IgG 2000. And we would want to break it up a little bit in the morning, a little bit in the afternoon, a little bit in the evening. Trickle it in, because every time you eat, it's a pretty violent action. And bacteria are dying. When they die, they release the contents into your body. So especially our more inflammatory groups of bacteria that can play a role in what we're in what we're doing here. Okay. Now, the probiotic that I would start with for her is HU58. I don't know if you are familiar with it. It doesn't get as much limelight and press as our famous Megaspore, but HU58 does a great job when we're dealing with any type of gut infection. HU58 secretes natural antimicrobial compounds up to between 12 and 24 different antibiotics on its own, including things like bacitracin. The bacteria is called Bacillus subtilis. I love it. It's probably one of my favorite products. And it's at a pretty high dose. So doing a couple of caps a day for 1 to 2 months, really assessing along the way. But then moving on to Megaspore, just so we can have that more broad spectrum support because you have more bacteria. And our goal with Megaspore isn't necessarily to get Bacillus spores to grow, Bacillus bacteria. These Bacillus strains help to support alpha diversity. They create vitamins, they secrete different substrates that feed the bacteria in the environment. So you're getting a bigger effect because, again, our goal is to improve this alpha diversity in the short chain fatty acid production. And if we keep doing that through supplements and diet, then we're really going to get her to a strong place. And then, oops, I spelled this wrong, MegaGuard. MegaGuard contains licorice flavonoids. It contains artichoke leaf extract. Both are really soothing. They support liver and gallbladder function because there's this potential that even though the ultrasound of her gallbladder looked good, perhaps it's not stimulating enough bile production that would roll in fat digestion. Fat malabsorption is going to show up in your toilet as steatorrhea. And so she's seen that. There is the question of whether it's really the increased motility from the hydrogen sulfide producing bacteria. That we don't know, but I think this is a good trial. However, with this, and you can do this as well, your patient will know pretty quickly if it's going to increase bowel movements. You can give them a baggie of this to take home. Taking home 5 pills, 10 pills, let them test it out if you want so that they don't have to commit. And then if it doesn't cause increased bowel movements, because it doesn't in everybody, then she can get that liver and gallbladder support and lowering inflammation as well in her stomach and in her intestines. So with other supplements, we are a very niche company in what we do. So there's a lot more to support here. Think about liver health, and she can use diet, herbal teas. She can use different supplements, curcumin, especially the curcumin oils, milk thistle. And then thinking about the way her liver has to deal with potentially extra estrogens that are circulating in her gut are really important. Let me see here. Now, hydrogen sulfide. I typically follow the work of Mark Pimentel when it comes to thinking about patients with methane dominance or hydrogen sulfide dominance in SIBO. Now, we're not necessarily dealing with SIBO, but potentially it's in both parts of her intestinal tract. Molybdenum drops do have hydrogen sulfide reducing qualities, and it can play a role in different neurotransmitter pathways as well. And you can add them to water. 200 to 300 micrograms a day is usually enough for the therapeutic benefit. Also for hydrogen sulfide, we can use bismuth or zinc acetate. And I can't find just a pure bismuth on the store shelves anywhere, but there are different blends. If you've got one, drop it my way. I'd love to know. I'm always looking for more information for my apothecary at home. And then using HistDAO can help break down histamines that are being produced by the bacteria. But this isn't an answer. This isn't the root of the problem. The root of the problem are the bacteria that are causing us to need all of this, unfortunately. Our goal is to get her on as few products as possible, because who wants to take a bunch of pills every day? We want to heal and correct. So if we can change the bacteria living there, we change the functionality. And that's going to improve liver health, estrogen metabolism, and just her quality of life. I would either check nutrients or move forward with B12 and folate supplementation, and then the K2 supplementation as well, being really important. Additionally, remember, no glutamine. She's got high ammonia. Hold off. Don't pull that trigger so quickly. It's in so many people's repertoire. And I get it. I've used it. I used to work in the hospital, and The patients that I worked with in oncology often suffered from mucositis, and we'd give glutamine shakes. I didn't know. And, so we just learn as we go and we pivot with more information. So for her, glutamine, not appropriate. No cysteine either, because this can increase hydrogen sulfide production. So many of us are taking N-acetylcysteine, especially as it's a preventative COVID protocol. Again, knowing what you're dealing with. Let's be personalized. Epsom salts, MSM, berberine also can play a role in worsening hydrogen sulfide production. And then diet. Oh man, some of my favorite foods are high in sulfur. Garlic, onion, broccoli, all of your cruciferous vegetables. We need sulfur as it links to our favorite antioxidant, glutathione, but can be problematic when dealing with this patient profile. Hopefully we heal her, then she can eat whatever she wants. So improving that alpha diversity piece, again, is going to be step one. And in order to do that, first we need to make sure there is no SIBO present. We don't want to add fuel to the fire and get a bunch of bacteria growing in her small intestine. We want them to grow in the dark depths of your colon. So oligosaccharides, especially that galacto-oligosaccharide, being really important for, and clinically shown to help lowering hydrogen sulfide. Resistant starches, use your kitchen as a laboratory to create fermented foods, sauerkrauts and different ferments. And fiber, can't get enough of it. If I could get my 8-year-old to eat 15 grams of fiber like I did this morning, then I know we can all do it too, self included. So sometimes that's hard. We have to make definitely the effort to do it, but we can do it. Labs to consider. So we are one piece to a complicated puzzle, obviously, but it's going to give us hints on which direction to go. Working with your patients to figure out, hey, do I need to work up SIBO? Let's follow up on those liver function tests because they were abnormal at the start. So making sure they're settling back into normalcy would be really good. That's a cheap test. It's a couple bucks. Looking at a micronutrient panel could be beneficial. And then corroborating that estrogen recycling with different hormone markers can also be helpful. So I pretty much ended at the perfect time, and I got to pat myself on my back because I'm a long talker. So with this individual, the information is in, see here. For those of you that came in after I started, if you click the link in the chat, there is information, the report that we reviewed, HIPAA compliant, we removed all the patient information, and then just this tiny slide deck here showing what we covered, what was this primary pattern that we were looking at with this patient, and what do we do about it? Because coming up with that action plan becomes really important here. Now, following up on this, we are going to have weekly installments of case studies, and each one of them will be a little bit different. One will be a methane dominant, one will be very inflammatory, and we'll have to work on that. And then we have other clinical scenarios that we'll be reviewing. So we want to help you as providers come up with ways to treat your patients and working with microbiome testing. If you're new to BiomeFx, definitely reach out. We're happy to help. We know that some of the words and verbiage can feel like another language, but it's fun to learn. If you're interested in testing this on yourself or one of those patients that just has kept you up at night, we are offering a coupon code for the next about month, I believe. The coupon code at checkout is Lunch and Learn. And you can, again, work with your local account manager to help walk you through that. And then we hope to see you on our consultations. The turnaround time for our BiomeFx test is just a couple of weeks now. And after that, you can review your reports with either myself or someone else from our clinical consultation team. We offer 30-minute express consults for those of you that are like super BiomeFx savvy. We also offer 60-minute full report walkthroughs so you can really get your feet wet and get comfortable. Keep those training wheels on, and we'll help you through the process until you're more comfortable with the test. If there are any other questions, let's see, I do have some from in the Q&A session. Give me 1 second to read through this. And that I'm going to have to give this one some thought, and I'll try to respond to you in an email. If you could shoot me your email address, that would be helpful. But if there aren't any other questions, I'm really grateful for you taking the time to come here today. Hopefully you unpacked your sack lunch and learned something new about the microbiome. And you know where to find me. I'm right here, always working on some gut stuff. And we hope to see you next week, same time, same place, and a new clinical situation to review. All right. Have a great afternoon.